thank you very much, Hugh. Let's not take a vote on the last part of it, all right? First of all, thanks very much. I'm sorry I've got to go back to the House of Commons after I've spoken, but there is a debate going on about a constitutional bill in which unaccountably a central part of the British Constitution is, you'll probably not believe me when I tell you this, but the right to demonstrate in Parliament Square. I think 10 years imprisonment for anyone demonstrating maybe is a reasonable starting point. Or do you think more than that? A little more than that, perhaps. But, so I'm going back to do that now. I'm sorry about that, but I'm sure you'll understand the importance of at least making our presence felt on that. First of all, thanks very much for a fantastic turnout tonight. And there's a lot of people in this hall that have put an enormous amount of effort over a very long time into the cause of Palestine, into the cause of supporting the people of Gaza who are in isolation, and indeed there are many in this room that have been to Gaza, either with the recent convoy, congratulations and well done, or have been with the boats that have got through, have shown their solidarity and an attempt to defeat the Western strategy of dividing Gaza from the West Bank and allowing the encirclement of Gaza to continue. So I think it's important that we make our views very clearly felt on that. As many of you will know, I've just returned from Gaza last night. I was on the delegation of European MPs organised by the Palestine Return Centre, and it was a large delegation, to put it mildly, therefore slightly unwieldy. There were 60 members of Parliament from 13 countries that visited. And I think it's important to put on a record our thanks to the Palestine Return Centre for all the organisation they put into that, and for the very significant impact of getting such a large number of people to visit Gaza, where we were given an incredible reception at every level. I've never, ever gone through the equivalent of an immigration checkpoint and had the official shake your hand before stamping your passport and say, welcome, it's nice of you to come here. Most immigration officials say, who are you, what do you want, why are you here? And they approach it by saying, you're more than welcome here. Then give you a bunch of flowers. I mean, I've never had that at Heathrow, I don't know if anybody else has. But it was that sort of reception that we received. But I have to say that the whole situation in Gaza is, frankly, deeply traumatic. There are, and I'm sure those that were there with the convoy and others will attest to everything I say here, that meeting families whose homes were bombed a year ago are still living in tents provided by Rotary clubs, by charities, and all the rest of it. That should not be. And children who I saw with my own eyes have serious injuries that require operations and treatment, unable to get treatment either in a local hospital because they haven't got the facilities to do it, or to get out to be treated in Israel or Egypt or anywhere else. So again, the encirclement or the blockade of the people of Gaza continues, and that degree of misery goes with it. And the psychological damage to a whole generation being brought up having known nothing for most of their lives but checkpoints, barbed wire, walls, imprisonment, bombardment, F-16 jets, destruction of homes and livelihood, getting a reasonable education courtesy of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the most educated population in the whole region, yet the highest rate of unemployment because the economy has completely collapsed. Street after street of businesses simply closed, shops not open because there's nothing to sell and there's nobody to buy who's got in a position to buy anything that they had to sell anyway. And such is the economic devastation that those people that are in work essentially either work for the government of Gaza or for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. And so this leads to psychological damage to a whole population, and for almost the first time, a degree of depression amongst young people as to their future, and a feeling that the only thing they can look forward to is escape. It is a brutal, vicious, nasty, and very, very dangerous situation. I was, like all of us here, taking part in all the demonstrations concerning the bombardment of Gaza a year ago. and the horrors that we witnessed on the television screens. But to see it, okay, a year on at first hand, the wanton destruction of people's homes, of a school that I visited when I was an election observer there at the presidential election, with a shell that had gone not through one wall but two. Now, how can anyone possibly justify firing a shell through a school? You have to be some kind of cold-blooded individual to be able to even think of justifying that kind of thing. Then the deliberate shooting down and bombing of minarets above mosques as a way of destroying people's sense of identity within their community. And then meeting families where one woman told me her husband, who had worked in Israel and spoke very fluent Hebrew, had been moved to what he thought was a safe place. When the bombardment started last year, the Israeli soldiers arrived at the door, and he explained to them in Hebrew that he wished to live, to stay there, and he was shot at point-blank range in cold blood. His son, traumatised, understandably protested this, so was shot as well. The body lay outside the house for 18 days, because they couldn't get out. Now, though the remains of the family, those children growing up, will never ever forget that experience. They'll be traumatised for the rest of their lives, as indeed whole communities are. That is the reality of what Israel was doing only a year ago in Gaza. And the supplies that eke their way through, the endless delays of the crossing points. In 2007, there were 500 trucks a day going in and out of Gaza. On a good day now, there's 100. Most days it's 80. Some days it's even less than that. And so it is a very, very serious situation indeed. And all the aid that was promised a year ago at the Sharm el-Sheikh conference, I understand from the United Nations through John Ging, had a very long meeting with him, was that none of that aid has got through, not because the money hasn't been pledged or provided or given access to, but because of the blockade, it's impossible to get the building materials and everything else through. So he gave an example, for example, that he wanted to get more desks for the schools because the young population's increased. He can bring in the wood, but he can't bring in the metal. They can't bring in cement, but they've got plenty of sand. Anyone that knows anything about building knows it's quite difficult to make a building only with sand. It does require a bit of cement to bind it together. And so reconstruction isn't happening. And all this horror, misery and depression goes on. But within that, there are also, I think, some signs of very strong optimism. One is that the elected government of Gaza is working. It operates. The Parliament building, whilst it was bombed and semi-destroyed by Israeli jets a year ago, provided us with a takeaway dinner in the ruins of the Parliament building, which I thought was very nice of them and quite a nice gesture. Certainly the food was more edible than some of the stuff you get in other places. It was really good. They were wanting to get the impression across, quite correctly, that they are doing their best to run a democracy in those kind of difficulties and that kind of condition. Now, if the convoys and the aid convoys, with persistence, can get there and deliver aid, if a dedicated group of members of Parliament can get there to show an act of solidarity with fellow citizens of this planet, then what is it that is stopping the European Union, the United States, the UN and everybody else saying to Israel, you broke the law, you bombed illegally, you used illegal weapons, you're imprisoning an entire population, you continue to imprison those elected representatives, and still no sanctions being made against Israel? Surely our call has to be now for economic sanctions against Israel for its illegal activities. Then the two other questions come up. One is the Goldstone Commission report into the atrocities that happened. If you've read Goldstone or summaries of Goldstone, you'll see it's an incredibly painstaking document. They went to the most